Did you vote to leave?
Yes.
Are you happy with how Brexit has gone?
No.
January 31st, 2020. This is the date that marked Brexit, the day when the UK officially left the European Union. Politicians had promised that it would bring the UK opportunities and stability. Yet, in reality, has it ended up putting the country in a rather sorry state? In the last 5 years, the UK has seen 4 prime ministers. And it's not just the UK's parliament that is politically unstable. So might be the country's borders. Independence movements are at their peak, and Scotland is only one referendum away from breaking loose from a centuries-long union. To top it all off, the economy isn't doing any better either, as the annual GDP growth has plummeted. Remind me of the cause of all this? Was it just to limit the migrant influx to the country, or rather a result of the surge in British nationalism? Did they succeed? Quite the contrary. This is the story of how Brexit backfired for the UK. Understanding Brexit. Brexit is a combination of 2 separate words, Britain and exit, a term that explains the withdrawal process of the UK from the EU. Before we look into how it happened, let's understand how the EU works and what made the UK want to leave them. On February 7th, 1992, leaders representing 12 different European nations signed the Maastricht Treaty and formed a union, the European Union. The Union gave Europe the structure of a single confederation, having its own legislature, executive, judiciary, and central bank. The EU has its own laws and foreign policy. This makes one wonder, what is the role of member nations? Are they an independent country, or are they part of another, bigger country? This question mark on state sovereignty urged the UK to break free and take back control.
We will be taking back control. We have already taken back control of our money, our borders, and our laws, and we will seize all the opportunities that Brexit brings.
You might be wondering why. The UK has mostly the same human rights and foreign policy as the EU. Why would they Brexit over them? There must be more. And you would be right. Although the concept of state sovereignty did play a huge role, there are several factors that fueled the fire. First being migrants. You see, the EU allows free travel between member nations, the same way there is free travel between US states. With the UK being a popular destination for migrant workers, many Britons started to feel, hey, maybe we've been giving a lot in exchange for nothing.
There will be tough new restrictions on access to our welfare system for EU migrants. No more something for nothing.
It's not just the migrants from the EU that made the UK leave. In response to the global refugee crisis, the EU brought into action one of its untouched rules. The EU decided to relocate refugees from Italy and Greece to other member states. How many refugees a country received depended on 4 factors: national GDP, population, unemployment level, and number of refugees already hosted. This meant that a large share of refugees headed towards the UK, where many were already unhappy with the migrants from the EU. All of this resulted in a referendum. The referendum was held on June 23, 2016. Out of 46.5 million eligible voters, more than 33.5 million took part in the process, resulting in a 72.2% turnout. With 51.9% of Brits being in favor of Brexit, preparations for Brexit officially began. Now, before we move further, take a look at this map. Blue indicates the councils where the majority wanted to leave, while yellow indicates the councils where the majority wanted to stay. Scotland's response. Now, here is where things get even more interesting. 2 years prior to the Brexit referendum, another referendum was held on Scottish independence. At the time, demand for a referendum was to extend Scottish authority over matters such as defence and foreign policy. 55.3% of voters voted to stay, thus Scotland continued being part of the UK. Let's take a look at the map of the United Kingdom in order to understand the situation better. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, be sure to subscribe as we continue to break down today's biggest economic stories. Now, let's take another look at the map showing the results of the Brexit referendum. You'll see that an overwhelming majority of Scotland voted to stay, 1.66 million, compared to only 1.02 million that voted leave. Every single council had a majority not wanting to leave, meaning that this Brexit concept was not supported by Scotland. A week after the Brexit referendum, Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon visited the EU headquarters in Brussels. There, she did not shy from showing her discontent with the results.
If there is a way for Scotland to stay, I am determined to try and find that way.
This re-erupted Scottish freedom movements, asking for another referendum that we call Indie Ref 2. While it cannot be said whether the majority of Scotland would want to leave the Union, what we do know is that Brexit has weakened the Union's hold on Scotland. Impacts on economy. So, Brexit did push Scotland away from the rest of the United Kingdom, but that's not the only way Brexit harmed them. It turned out to be a nightmare for the UK's economy. Without any tariffs and implications, trading with the EU had been a breeze. It was obvious that Brexit would change this. However, the ruling Conservative Party believed otherwise.
This country will be ready for whether we have a Canadian or an Australian solution, and there will be jobs created in this country throughout the whole of the UK, not just in spite of Brexit, but because of Brexit. Because this country is going to become a magnet for overseas investment. Indeed, it already is and will remain so.
They believed that with more freedom and sovereignty, the UK would establish better trade deals outside the EU and overcome the direct impact of leaving. But that was wishful thinking. As is usually the case, countries trade with their close-by neighbours or those providing cheap labour. Before Brexit, the UK was a dream location for foreign investments, mostly for these two reasons. Firstly, they provide foreign investment with access to the huge market that is the EU. Second, they speak English. The Conservative Tory party believed that the language and First World relationships would overcome the reduction in market size and that foreign direct investment would just keep flowing in. But that just didn't happen. True that the UK speaks English, but that is nothing new. After losing the EU market, they started losing FDI too. Brexit really harmed the UK economy. Though it is still the 6th largest economy, second in Europe, its GDP would have been much higher without Brexit. According to one estimate, it would have been 2.5% higher than its actual value at the end of the year 2023.
And there is an elephant in this here chamber when it comes to the dire economic circumstances facing the UK, and that's Brexit.
Refugees and migrants. This was Stephen Flynn, a member of the UK Parliament representing the Scottish National Party. So Stephen Flynn believes that Brexit has caused problems for the UK's economy. But what else does he believe?
It is acceptable to ask people to come to these shores to care for our family members, whilst we show complete disregard for theirs. What has become of this place?
Stephen believes that not taking refugees is unacceptable. The UK's government believes otherwise. Putting a stop to migration was in fact a major reason why Brexit happened. Let's understand how. Brits were never happy with open borders. As the UK had one of the highest percentages of foreign-born residents in the entirety of the EU, in 2015, the refugee relocation event was then a cherry on top. It triggered mass protests across the country. The UK sought no solution except Brexit, but that didn't go as planned either.
So what did Brexit do for immigration?
Well, what we did, which is absolutely extraordinary, is we ended up stopping a whole lot of young, often single Europeans coming and working here in the hospitality sector. Now we've swapped out what were younger usually single people coming in from Europe to work in our hospitality sector and other sectors, technology sector, and we swapped that for much increased immigration from Asia and Africa.
The UK has an aging problem, which means their own population doesn't have enough people to completely fill their workforce. And with the UK not being an ideal location for EU workers anymore, these migrants had to come from other countries, such as Pakistan, India, and Nigeria. How was there an increase in the number of migrants? Well, unlike the EU workers, the non-European migrants mostly came with families, and the number of non-working family members simply exceeded the number of migrants active in the workforce. There were 460,000 EU workers in the UK. Brexit did bring a shortfall to this workforce, with only 130,000 workers. On the contrary, net migration increased by a whopping amount. Net migration of 333,000 in 2015 had increased to 764,000 in 2022, which is approximately 2.3 times higher. Political impacts. Now, if you ask the Conservative Party, Brexit was still a blessing and will bring a better tomorrow, except that tomorrow seems to remain in the future.
I was proud to back Brexit, proud to back Leave, and that's because, despite the challenges, in the long term, I believe the agility, flexibility and freedom provided by Brexit would be more valuable in a 21st century global economy than just proximity to a market. That in the long term, a renewed culture of enterprise, willingness to take risks and be imaginative would inspire changes in the way we do things at home.
Sorry, Rishi, but the British citizens are just not buying this anymore. Surveys had been conducted over time on citizens' reaction to Brexit, and the percentage of citizens regretting just keeps on increasing. While there may be other factors leading to it, analysing the 2024 general elections will help us understand just how much Brits actually regret Brexit. The Conservative Party had their worst election campaign since their formation in 1830. They secured 121 seats only, while in previous elections they won 365 seats. The Labour Party emerged victorious, winning 411 seats, a simple majority of 172 and an increase of 209 seats from last elections. Once we establish that Brexit harmed the UK, it brings us to another question. Is there any possibility for the UK to become part of the EU again? According to a former Belgian Prime Minister, yes.
The UK will rejoin the EU. It's not a matter of if, but when.
We don't know what the future holds, and despite the protests, it is unclear whether the UK will ever rejoin the EU. Let us know your thoughts on Brexit. Do you believe it has only harmed the UK, or do you believe that it's going to be fruitful in the long run, just like Rishi Sunak says? Do you think the UK will ever rejoin the EU? If yes, then when? Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more of today's economic stories.